Thank you for joining us today. It is a great pleasure to introduce today's webinar presenter, an expert in the field and a passionate guide and conservationist, Joe Charleson. For 28 years, we at Natural Habitat Adventures have been leading small groups of travelers to some of the wildest corners of our planet to discover nature's most spectacular sights. And when we started, there was a relatively new term for this type of travel that was designed to educate, invigorate, and protect, and that was called ecotourism. And at the forefront of this productive type of travel, even before the term ecotourism existed, there was the country of Kenya, a vast, diverse land, sprawling savannas, snow-capped peaks, highland rainforest, and of course, most notably, a prolific animal wildlife. And now 3 decades on, Natural Habitat has expanded its operations to invest in quality operations in emerging countries, and we're proud to introduce to our guests Natural Habitat Safaris, and of course its founder and our partner, Joe Charleson. A little bit about Joe. He was born in England and at the age of 10 moved to Kenya with his family, spending long days in the bush, traveling in the country's furthest corners for weeks at a time. And Joe was hooked at a very early age, committed to a life in Africa's natural environment. After his teen years exploring the continent, he attended university in England, earning a degree in biology, and then he attended Guide Training Academy. As a result of his congenial nature, Joe moved quickly up the ranks in African guiding, and eventually captured the coveted position of a resident safari guide at world-famous Jack's Camp in Botswana's Kalahari Desert. Unbelievable place if you haven't been. And from there, it was back to Kenya, where Joe managed the classic Cotter's Camp in the Maasai Mara, and then became a member of the prestigious original Curran Downey Guide Cooperative, a dedication reserved only for a few select safari guides. Joe is still a member of this select group. And Joe entered the next phase of his career when he established his own safari company, East Africa Safari Ventures, committed to conservation and to incorporating local communities into the tourist industry. A major component of this venture was the establishment of a remote and beautiful protected area, the Siana Conservancy, where he built his camp, Luleshwa Safari Camp, on a river. This remains today one of the Maasai Mara ecosystem's most remote and private accommodations. And it was at Luleshwa Camp where our director, Ben Bressler, fell so in love with the area and Joe's philosophy that the two were determined to create a partnership with Joe and Kenya that would enhance the services and options that Natural Habitat offers our guests. Equally as important, they agreed that the partnership could deliver the most effective form of conservation through ecotourism. Thus, East Africa Safari Adventures joined the Natural Habitat travel family and has become Natural Habitat Safaris, a Nairobi-based operation offering a host of remote safari experiences of the highest quality in small group manner, just as our Natural Habitat philosophy has always delivered. And it gives us great pleasure today to introduce to you a true expert in the field, a wonderful man, a good friend who I've had the pleasure of traveling with, Joe Charleson, calling in from South Africa.
Hi there, Don. Thanks very much, and hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar. As Don mentioned, I'm calling in from South Africa, and I hope that the technology here is good enough that you can all hear me well. What I'd like to do today is actually just tell you a little bit about Kenya, why we live and work there, what we find beautiful and amazing about this country, and why our safaris here are a little bit different from in other parts of the continent. I would then like to turn a bit to chat about some of Natural Habitat safaris within the region as well. And then perhaps finish off with an opportunity to let any of you who want to ask a few questions, which I'll try and answer as best I can. So first of all, just a little bit about Kenya and why we love it so much. If I can move on to the next slide. Kenya is a place of wonderful variety. It's a very, very wild area. Within Africa, there are so many different places one can go out, but to me, Kenya offers the greatest wildlife wilderness areas, variety, community, and all sorts of amazing experiences that one can have. Because it's been a safari destination for such a long time, I think as a community of safari goers there, we've really learnt how to offer the best to guests. And what we love to specialise in at Natural Habitat is really giving guests the most amazing wildlife and wilderness experiences whilst keeping them off the beaten track and away from everybody else. The image you can see here is actually taken on a safari in Amboseli down in the southern part of the country, where we have these wonderful bull elephants fighting right next to the car. Just moving on, Kenya is well known as being a fantastic wildlife destination. One of the key draws of it is the Great Wildebeest Migration. This is an annual event and the greatest land movement of mammals anywhere on the earth. There are about 1.5 million wildebeest and then other plains game move over the plains of the Mara Serengeti ecosystem. And Kenya is lucky enough to be on the receiving end of all these fantastic animals in the summer months, the European and American summer months. This is one of the most amazing wildlife spectacles on Earth, and is often referred to as being one of the greatest the great natural wonders of the world. The variety that Kenya has, I've shown you a couple of slides of Amboseli and of the Maasai Mara, great big open plains, but Kenya has so much more as well. As Don mentioned, we have snow on the equator in Mount Kenya. We have beautiful deserts, dry arid land stretching off to the north, and then some beautiful lakes down in the Great Rift Valley as well. These lakes vary from freshwater ones to soda ones, and one pictured here is a Loigan in the central part of the country, near Lake Naivasha, showing some of the flamingos that move up and down the Great Rift Valley. The variety that Kenya has to offer is beautiful and should appeal to everybody, every nature lover, be they interested in the great big predators, wonderful birds, or just the wonderful landscapes that we have. I've been guiding for nearly 20 years now within southern and East Africa, and as a guide, one of the things that I enjoy doing the most is getting my guests up close and personal with the action. I'd like to be able to give everybody a front row seat on what's going on, so we can really be there to see how the animals behave, be it a pride of lions with youngsters exploring their surroundings for the first time and meeting other members of the pride, or be it back up in Nairobi, where over a lovely breakfast in a lodge we have gentle giants leaning their heads in through the windows to try and join us. This is taken at Giraffe Manor, which is one of Nairobi's most wonderful accommodations. But most of all, it's really just getting out there and enjoying being out in wilderness and immersing ourselves in that. And as I said, having everybody on the front row being able to enjoy the sightings that we're finding. We get along into lots of different areas. As mentioned before, the open plains, the highland forests, the different lakes, lake systems that are out there. But within all of this, it's all about getting up there with the wildlife and having immersing ourselves in the most amazing wilderness situations. Okay, so we're up in northern Kenya, and those are the Samburu of northern Kenya. They're one of the nomadic pastoralist tribes that's up there, cousins of the famous Maasai. And the reason I bring the community into this is they're an important part of all of our safaris. Without the community, there wouldn't be many of the conservation areas that we have. And all of these areas give us different possibilities of ways to explore the wilderness. And I'll go into our relationship with the community and how that impacts our safaris in a little bit more detail later on. So just to sort of wrap up the introduction a little bit, I think that Kenya has a lot to offer, whether it's those who are interested in the amazing mammals that we have, the predators such as the leopards, the lions, the cheetah, or the variety that our bird life offers as well. Kenya's got in excess of 1,000 different bird species, which, and with all the different habitats we have, they offer even an amateur bird the most fascinating insights into Africa. So, as guides, we love being out in the bush. We love sharing it with people. We love to explain what's going on. And I hope that when all of our guests come out on safari, they enjoy sharing this with us as well. Now, a lot of the shots that I've taken so far, and I've shown so far, have been taken from vehicles. That's the best way to get close to the wildlife, be able to spend most time with different wild animals and birds without actually disturbing them too much. But it's certainly not the only way to get out on safari. And one of the wonderful things about Kenya and the different national parks, game reserves and conservation areas that we have is that we also have one of the widest array of activities that one can do out on safari. As I mentioned, a lot of our time is spent in the vehicles. This is the best way to see wildlife. But I also think it's important for guests now to get out there and to really appreciate these wilderness areas in a different fashion. Imagine, for example, walking across the plains of the Northern Frontier District on camels with the Samburu warriors, learning their traditional way of life, seeing how they interact with the environment and the wildlife around them. Flying around the country gives an aerial view of what's going on and the ability to actually put everything in perspective and see all the different areas fit together. The aircraft that we like to use are light aircraft, generally Cessna Caravans, and we think them the best aircraft for our bush runways and bush strips. As well as this, I would always suggest that guests get out in the bush on foot, as this is really the best way to experience all those small things that you miss from a vehicle. And guided walking safaris with local Maasai and with our own expert guides really opens up a whole new avenue of being out in the bush for guests. Now, whether you're walking out in the bush or walking in amongst villagers, this is a Pokot lady from the central part of Kenya. This is a fascinating tribe that inhabit the northern boundaries of Lake Baringo. They live there, spending their time between fishing and nomadic pastoralism, and spending half a day out in the bush with them, learning what they know, is a fantastic way to get out into the bush. We also get into some very remote areas. Here's a photograph of being out in Ithumba, which is an area down in the southeast of the country, where one can spend time with orphaned elephants that have been released back into the wild. In all my many years of being out in the bush, this has been one of my most magical experiences, walking in amongst these gentle giants as they're learning how to cope with their environment around them. So the variety that we like to encourage our guests to experience is quite wide. Some of it's done old style, such as this 1930s biplane, which is launched from the lower slopes of Mount Kenya, and one can explore all the different plains and valleys of Lewa, Barana, and the surrounding areas, whilst having Out of Africa playing in the background, all the way through to slightly more modern ways, such as getting out in a helicopter, which allows you to really get out some of the most remote areas in the country. One can fly up into the Northern Frontier District and up onto the sacred mountain of Oldonyo Sabachi, with the most amazing views over kilometers and kilometers of land around there. Now, for those who have a little more of an adrenaline feel to their lives, we do have some slightly more exciting ways of getting out and about in the bush, such as quad bikes. And I'd like to sort of finish with one of the most amazing experiences out on safari, which is drifting over the great wildebeest migration in a hot air balloon. These balloons take off at dawn and drift over the plains of the Mara, where you're over thousands upon thousands of wildebeest before you land and are greeted with a lovely champagne breakfast at the other end. So that just gives you an idea of the variety of activities that are available to visitors to Kenya, and it certainly is a much wider scope than in many other countries. What I'd like to chat a little bit about now is something that Don touched on in his introduction, which is conservation and community, because the two very much go hand in hand. As I mentioned on the slide with the Samburu, you know, the nomadic pastoralist tribes have been super important in the conservation of wildlife within Kenya. Because of their way of life, moving over vast areas of land, herding their livestock, we've ended up with a situation of people and their livestock living alongside wildlife in vast areas of the country. And these are many of the communities that we live and work with, and that our guests get a chance to really interact with and get to know whilst they're out on safari. In our own camp, the Leshwa camp, which is down in the Maasai Mara, and a lot of photographs here of the Maasai community, we're now working hand in hand, putting together a private 13,000-acre conservation area, which will be of direct benefit to this community. We're dealing directly with the landowners and enabling them to see the benefits of tourism within their areas by virtue of tourists coming in and then receiving funds from that. This has been absolutely vital in conserving our part of the Mara ecosystem, which is a very important migration route between the Maasai Mara and the surrounding Loita Hills. Now, all of our guests who come out on safari get a chance to get involved and to give back, be that with visiting schools that are supported by our safaris, or villages, or markets. But one of the main things about all of these interactions is they're all very authentic. None of them are staged or commercial. It's all very real interactions with family members of the staff that we have in our camps and friends of ours that we've been working with for many years. And for many people who come over, even though they love they love the wildlife, and that's been the core reason for their trip, oftentimes it's the interactions with the local communities that leaves them feeling the most enriched and with the most rich feeling of all of their time in Africa. So now I've given you a little information on Kenya and the types of ways we run our trips. I'd like to chat a little bit about some of the ways that some of the trips to natural habitat is doing into Kenya, just as this highlights a little bit, I think, some of the different areas, highlights them even further, as well as the different styles of accommodation. As with everything, the variety is key here, and the different styles that are available are so important. There are three itineraries that I'd like to look at, as I think this gives us a good idea of the spread of things that we do. The first one of which is our Great Migration Safari. Now this runs during the migration season when the wildebeest are on the plains of the Maasai Mara. And as I mentioned earlier, that falls between about July and September time. So coincides with the European and American summer holidays. Now, within our Great Migration Safari, we're visiting two different destinations within the Mara. One is outside of the reserve, where we're staying in a permanent tented camp there, and another one is inside of the reserve. The entire itinerary lasts about a week, um, and, um, and you get to visit two quite distinct areas, both of which are a vital part of the migration area and offer some wonderful game viewing. Whilst we're talking about this, I'd like to sort of highlight one of the main ways that we house our guests on safari, which I think is a very unique aspect to our trips, which is mobile tented camps. Now, a mobile camp is a camp that we put in just for our groups. Now, our natural habitat groups are some of the smallest out there, and we never have more than 10 guests on one of these safaris. So we'll always have a camp just put in just for this group, and it's one of the most ecologically friendly ways of visiting the bush. There's nothing in camp before you get there. We arrive, we set up a beautiful, elegant tents with very modern facilities, and then by the end of the trip, all is broken down. Now these camps are set up in the best areas to view the migration, so allow guests the chance to explore the best parts of the Mara Game Reserve for that time of year. This includes a front row seat on river crossings for the wildebeest, which is an amazing spectacle, and waiting on the banks for thousands upon thousands of wildebeest to come crashing across the river is fantastic, especially when there are crocodiles lurking nearby or lions lying in wait on the opposite bank. As well as concentrating on the wildebeest, we also, the Mara itself is one of the most amazing predator places in Africa, and it offers the chance to really get up close and personal and to get to know different individuals. Many people will have seen shows such as the Big Cat Diary or African Cats, and this gives a chance to actually get out there and meet some of the stars of this. But however we're doing it, our mobile camps give everybody the chance to be in the thick of the action and where everything is happening. And so from a wildlife perspective, this mobile base is one of the most fantastic things. A little bit more information on the camps. They're, as I've mentioned before, extremely comfortable, just for the groups that we have. So it's private to natural habitat, but everything is very, very elegant and very, very comfortable. Dinner is a three-course meal served out in a lovely mess tent or even under the stars. All the food is cooked freshly in the kitchen over hot coals, and then every night you get the opportunity to relax around the campfire, chat over the stories of the day, meet and make new friends, and then plan the next day and the adventures ahead. From a guide's perspective, there's nothing more amazing than being out in one of these camps, as you have absolute freedom to do what you like and set the itineraries that you want that will suit your guests the best. So mobile camps form a big part of our itineraries, as you'll see from our other itineraries that I'm talking about. We'd also like to chat about the best of Kenya. As with all of our trips, these are also smallest groups, the best expedition leaders, and they also visit the most exciting and out of the way safari destinations. We pride ourselves on our safaris being based around the animal count and not just the thread count. But saying that, we still have some amazing camps and lodges included within there. Now, our best of Kenya itinerary, as you'll see, takes guests up to the north of Kenya and then down into Laikipia. So you're getting down into the Maasai Mara, sorry. So you're getting to mix the best of the animals in northern Kenya, animals such as rhinoceros, Grevy's zebra, wild dogs, along with the wonderful wildlife of southern Kenya and the Maasai Mara. We use a lovely tented camp up in the north called Kicheche, which is based on one of the rhino sanctuaries up there. Kenya is a very important rhino conservation area, and with the efforts that are going on at the moment, our rhino numbers are steadily increasing. We have both black and white rhinoceros, and alongside the other rare species of the north, such as the wild or the Grevy's zebra, the Samburu giraffe, this really offers a different aspect to a trip and a whole different wildlife. From Kicheche, we travelled down to our own Leleshwa camp, which is the camp based on the private conservation area I was telling you about earlier on. As with Kicheche, this is a small, intimate camp, and it gives you the chance to explore the Maasai Mara and get to know the Maasai people in a slightly different fashion. Rather than only concentrating on game drive, you can also get out on foot, walk with giraffe and plains game, enjoy wonderful bush dinners and bush meals out on the plains, before finally ending up in the thick of the action in our mobile camps in the middle of the Maasai Mara Game Reserve. So as an itinerary that showcases the best of what Kenya has to offer, I think this is quite amazing, as it does show some very distinct areas, some very distinct experiences in each. But throughout you have the same guide leading you through the trip, explaining everything, drawing in the different aspects of things you're learning from different areas and how they all fit together. As a final itinerary that we're offering, I'd like to chat about hiking in the footsteps of the Maasai, which is our walking safari up in the Loiter Hills. This is something that's absolutely unique to natural habitat. Getting up into this area, there's about 400 square kilometers of pristine highland forest, which is absolutely untouched. And we go out there in a very, very rustic style. This type of safari is really geared towards those who are very active and want to really get off the beaten track and away from everything, away from everybody else, away from the modern world, it's a beautiful area, a part of Maasai land that very few people visit, and our safaris take us there on foot. We walk out into these wonderful areas, but our camp is carried along in a traditional style on the backs of donkeys who go ahead, and with their handlers, camp is set up ahead of us every night. Because of the very remote area that we have and the interesting, difficult terrain to get there, the accommodation is a little bit more rustic, but still very, very comfortable. The Loiter Hills and the sacred forest up there are quite beautiful, and it's a very unique part of the country. It's got some of the oldest trees, podocarps, cedars, junipers out there, as well as some of the most amazing wildlife. There are over 2,000 colobus monkeys up in there, turacos, red-fronted parrots, as well as a lot of other large mammals, which are a little bit shy, but you catch a glimpse of every now and then, ranging from elephants to buffalo, bushbuck, even hippopotamus, lion and leopard are up there. This is really a type of safari for people who want to get away from the modern world and immerse themselves in Maasai culture. We have a team of Maasai guides we work with up there, who are native to the area, who've grown up, lived their lives there, and give us the chance to really explore these amazing places. It's a land of wonderful views, some very, very special wildlife interactions because they're so unusual, and really it's a place of solitude to get away from it all. Now, we appreciate that this may not, that a walking safari up in the Loiter Hills is quite a specialist type of safari, and that all of our trips offer and focus on a particular type of experience. But what we do also do in Natural Habitat is organise custom-made safaris, which are particularly suited to an individual or small group. Now, our custom trips, as I say, are designed specifically for whatever it is a guest has in mind. So we'll always look at the itinerary that people are for the interest that people have, the type of people who are in the group, and then we will suggest an itinerary based on that. Some of the sort of final slides that I've got here show some of the most unique and amazing accommodation that we have up in Kenya, ranging from some of the ranches the northern part of the country, places like Lewa and Loisaba, and going up into the Matthews Range as well. So I seem to have jumped a little section here, and I apologize for that. This is one of the complications of dealing with this from Africa with our technology such as it is. Just wanted to chat a little bit more about some of our guides. Our guides are handpicked from amongst the best in Kenya. We have a small group of dedicated guides who are working just with us on our natural habitat safaris. All of us have years of experience, have an absolute passion and enthusiasm for the bush, which I hope rubs off on our guests when they come over. We choose to be out in the bush because it is our passion, and because it's what we love doing. We love being out there. We love sharing everything with our guests, and I think that having a guide accompany your group, your family, your natural habitat trip through the duration really adds to the experience that we have. So when you couple our small group sizes, our private guides, and our unique accommodations such as our mobile camps, our rustic walking safaris up in the Loiter Hills, along with the fine selection of permanent camps and lodges that we have, I believe that we'll be able to find a safari experience that should work for anybody and everybody. So that was my presentation on Kenya, and I would love to invite any questions if we have any.
Well, thank you, Joe. I think that considering the fact that you had a challenging internet connection, you did quite well keeping up with
Thank you very much.
with the slides. It was very nice. So let's see. We do have some very good questions here. This one is probably the most frequently asked of all, and it is, when is the best time to visit Kenya, and how long should we plan to go to see all that must be seen?
Okay, it's a very good question indeed. There are many good times to visit Kenya. From a wildlife perspective, probably the most popular one is when the great wildebeest migration is in the country, which is between July and running into late September, October time. So that's definitely the most popular time for guests to visit. As a result of that, it's also probably the more busy time in the country, but our itineraries are set such that we try and keep people off the beaten track and away from the crowds as much as possible. Outside of the migration season, personally my favourite times of year are sort of September, October into early November, and then February, as these are less crowded times when we still have some amazing wildlife and wilderness experiences, and where you can really go out there and get yourself lost out in the wild. I say that in the best way, of course. Probably the times to avoid when planning are the rainy seasons, which fall late November and then also in April, May. So yeah, a lot of our itineraries of natural habitat are set in the sort of July, August, September time, so as to catch the great wildebeest migration, which is one of the wildlife highlights of the year.
Excellent. And how long would you say a person should stay in order to see everything?
The minimum length of time would probably be a little bit over a week. International flights being what they are, we generally have people arriving and departing in the late evening, which means we have to include some time in Nairobi, or we usually have to include some time in Nairobi, so there's always a night there. And then you want to have 3 to 4 nights in 2 safari destinations. Ideally though, we like people to try and stretch their trips to somewhere between 10 days and 14 days, as this will give us a chance to go to 3 or 4 different places and really highlight the variety that Kenya has to offer.
Very good. Thank you. And what do you recommend for type of clothing to pack, and what will the climate be like?
It's a very good question. Kenya is very varied, and so the clothing and the packing that needs to be done will often depend upon the itinerary. If I look at the places that we're featured in our itineraries, such as Nairobi, Laikipia, and the Maasai Mara, most of these are at a fairly high elevation, between about 5,000 and 6,500 feet above sea level, so not particularly dissimilar to what you have in the sort of Denver, Boulder area. We are on the equator, though, but despite that, because of the altitude, it does get quite cool at night, sometimes dropping as low as, just working out in Fahrenheit quickly, probably about 45 to 50, whereas the daytimes can get up to 90 plus. What we generally recommend people will do is to bring layers, because you'll often start off in a game drive in the morning when it's very chilly, and then as you're going through the day, you'll be able to peel off layers, and you have shorts and t-shirts, and then later on in the day at the other end, when you're out again, you can put on warmer clothes as it cools off again. I would think, however, one of the main things to get across is that safari out in Africa is actually, certainly out in Kenya, is quite casual, and so khaki trousers and a fleece are really what one needs. The days of black tie, dinners in tents are not so frequent now.
Very good, thank you. Now, one of the other frequently asked questions is about different sorts of pests and mosquitoes in particular, and whether that is a concern, especially for someone who might seem to attract every mosquito within a 100-mile range.
Again, because of a lot of the safari areas we go to and how cool they get at night, we're generally not inundated with mosquitoes, and I have a lot of guests who come over armed with bug repellent, which they never touch. We would, if we know guests are going to be going to a place where they're at a lower altitude, warmer area, perhaps a more swampy area where we know they might have more mosquitoes, we'll certainly mention that to them. But for the most part, if you're avoiding the wetter times of year, so if you're not traveling in November and April, May, then you're generally avoiding times of bad bugs, as the bugs do coincide with the rains. As I say, for the most part, I would think 95% of guests come away saying they've been extremely pleasantly surprised by how few bugs they were that they encountered along the way.
Oh, very good. And how fit should someone plan to be? Should someone plan to do a little bit of extra walking and to prepare for this sort of a trip?
All depends on how active you're going to be. In a trip like our hiking in the footsteps of the Maasai up in the Loiter Hills, guests really need to be quite fit. We're generally walking for 5 or 6 hours a day there, but it's not a forced march. It's more of a more gentle stroll, stopping, always looking at things, and we rarely cover more than about 8 or 10 miles in a day, even though we're walking that much. The terrain is also such that it's very difficult to move very fast there. When we're building our custom trips for groups, if somebody is particularly interested in being active, and that is mentioned to us, then we'll certainly include some safari destinations that have camel safaris, horseback safaris, a lot of walking, maybe the chance to go out and river rafting. And this is especially important when you've got kids in the itinerary as well, because when you've got kids coming in a group, we always find that they're fascinated by wildlife, and they're even more fascinated by the people they meet. But if you try and coop them up in a vehicle for 2 weeks, it gets a bit difficult, and you really need to get them out there and moving around and enjoying themselves.
All right, very good. Now, what about children and families? Is this a trip that would be appropriate for children? If so, what age?
Safari is something that I believe kids should be able to enjoy. My wife and I are always out on safari with our son. He's almost 4 now, and he's been coming out in the bush with us since he was very young. He's grown up with that, and I would hope for the better as a result. I think it's such a rich experience for kids, And just meeting other people from a different culture and experiencing something different is such an important part of their upbringing. I think actually one of the most limiting factors is getting across from Europe or North America, and especially from the States, where you've really got two very long flights to get over here. And as a result of that, I would generally say that 8 to 10 years, depending on the child, is probably the age you should aim to bring kids over. In terms of groups coming over, we would try and set itineraries and recommend some of our set itineraries based on the ages of the kids and how active they like to be. What I've often found is that where families come over with multiple generations, perhaps grandparents coming over with their children and grandchildren, is one of the most amazing trips because you've got such a fantastic opportunity for those families to interact. They really do have all that time to spend together and bond together. And in those instances, it's often best to look at putting together a custom trip just for that family, especially if you're getting up to, say, 6 to 8 individuals. And with that, what's even more amazing is to go into to look at some mobile camping trips where you then have absolute exclusivity to your accommodation as well.
All right, very good. And speaking of the mobile safaris and so forth, there's another question about the comfort level of the different safaris. So maybe you could speak a little bit. I mean, the photos were very said a lot about the different comfort levels, but maybe you could speak a little bit more about the different tented camps.
Thank you, Dave. So within Kenya, there is a wide range of accommodation, and there's something out there that really would suit every budget. A natural habitat, our focus is on getting people the amazing wildlife and wilderness experience, but we try and ensure that that's not at the expense of comfort. Within the permanent properties that we use, permanent camps and lodges, even if they're tented, they all have running hot and cold water, flushing toilets, full lighting in the tents. So I mean, they really, even though we're talking about tents, we're talking about fairly massive and very comfortable structures. So I think from those, that's the comfort level there, I would say, is very, very high. At the opposite end of what we offer, we have our very rustic camps, such as going up into the Loiter Hills, where we have much smaller tents, which are 10 foot by 10 foot. But inside of that, we have cot beds or stretcher double beds with full-on bedding, duvets, comforters, hot water bottles every night. In the end, it's the experience of being, I think, out in the bush and the exclusivity of that's what makes things special. It's the guy who's bringing the cup of tea in the morning to wake you up, the guide who's sharing all of his knowledge with you along the way. To give a bit of special mention to our mobile camp, I think everybody who's listening will have seen from our photographs that it is a very, very comfortable camp. We have flushing toilets in there. We have lighting inside of the tents. Our showers are based on a traditional, we call a bucket shower, where we have a big canvas bucket that hangs off the back of the tent and gets filled up with piping hot water as and when guests would like to shower, which is then brought into the tent into a proper shower rose. So all of this is included within the one structure. You don't have to leave your tent to go out to the bathroom or anything like that. But I find with all of our guests who come out, they think they're always amazed by the level of comfort that we can bring out and set up just for a group in a mobile camp. But if anybody has any specific questions, the office has photographs of different facilities and things like that we can share with folks if they've got some specific concerns at all.
Okay, thank you. And one more question about comfort. What about the safari vehicles? Are those also comfortable?
They certainly are. We use only custom-built 4x4s, Toyota Land Cruisers and sometimes Land Rovers. All of our vehicles are set up in such a way that there are generally 5 guests in there along with the guide. Every guest has a window seat and access to a roof hatch as well. And on certain trips we also have a local tracker or spotter from the immediate area who's there to help the guide in spotting game, and he's normally stood up or sat up at the back of the car. The vehicles are very, very rugged and built for being out in the bush. A lot of the terrain out there is quite bad. At certain times of year, if we've had a little bit of rain, the roads do get a bit muddy and slippy, but our vehicles are such that they can ford rivers, go through swamps and all sorts, and still be very, very comfortable for guests. Within the vehicles, we always have an array of cold drinks and snacks available, whether they're in a cool box or in one of the car fridges. We generally have access to charging facilities for cameras and batteries, as well as the guides having their own little library along with them, so we have reference books as well. So given the vehicle is where you spend a lot of time on safaris, that's where most of the game viewing activities are done from, they have to be comfortable, and we make sure that they are.
Ah, wonderful. Thank you. Let's talk about food for just a minute. And the question is, can you prepare vegetarian food or meet the needs of a special diet?
Absolutely. We can, with enough advance warning, we can pretty much deal with anything. All of our food is freshly prepared. I mean, I'm going to use the Leshra camp, our mobile, and the loiter as an example. Everything comes down from Nairobi as is required from a safari, all the meats and vegetables, and then they're prepared by the chef out on the trip. If we're in a permanent camp such as the Leshra, then there's a well-stocked kitchen to do that. Out in the bush, the chef may be cooking over hot coals and baking bread and roasts in the charcoal oven, but he's well practiced at doing that. So the chefs are very good at making very fresh food every day, from baking fresh breads to cakes to muffins in the morning, preparing lovely fresh salads for lunches in the days, and then serving wonderful hearty three-course meals in the evening. In terms of the range of dietary requirements that we cater to, it's been everything from vegetarian, gluten intolerance or allergies, lactose intolerance or allergies, requests for certain meats to be excluded from diet, be they pork or seafood or shellfish or whatever it may be. As I say, with advance notice, we can pretty much deal with everything.
Great, thank you. And we just have a few minutes left, so I will ask just maybe two more questions. There were several questions here about safety and security, and so perhaps you could talk a little bit about that.
Safety and security, well, when we're out on safari, we are obviously in wilderness areas that are surrounded by wild animals. At all times, our guides are aware of what's going on and the animals that are in a certain area. And when we go out on certain activities, be they walking safaris or things like that, they're done in a way that allows the guide to have a control over what's going on. And really, as long as guests just following what seems to be common sense and following instructions of their guides, then they'll be absolutely fine. And wild animals have a way of viewing us with a little bit of suspicion, and generally during the daytime keeping away from where people are moving around on foot. Certain areas where there's quite high density of perhaps dangerous animals such as elephant or buffalo, then we take extra precautions going out with armed rangers and things like that. But in other areas where we know there to be a much low or no risk at all, then we behave differently and do our walking safari slightly differently there. In terms of being in and around Nairobi and the other big cities, Kenya is like any other part of the world in that there are places to go within cities and towns and places not to go. In our itineraries, we're generally using small guest houses that are out in a fairly remote suburb of the city called Karen, named after Karen Blixen, or within the national park, which is relatively close to the airport at a place called the Makoko. Both of those areas are well away from downtown Nairobi, and yeah, any places where you have sort of larger populations living, and we're always very, very conscious of keeping guests out of any areas that could be potentially troublesome. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, Lee.
I think it does. Thank you very much. So just one last question here, and that's about electrical outlets to charge batteries for cameras and so forth. Is that available when you're out in the tented camp?
Absolutely. I mean, within the permanent camps and lodges, they'll all either have a power supply that's either generator or solar powered. Outlets in Kenya follow the British system, so we use a 3 square pin plug that is 240 volts. Most appliances, electrical appliances, will deal with 100 to 240 volts. Guests can check their little charging packs there. But the most important thing is really to try and have as many of them with a UK plug as possible. We'll always have some adapters around so that people can use their American plugs within our UK wall sockets. In our mobile camps, we have charging facilities in the camp and in the vehicle as well. So anybody who's got camera batteries, laptops, and such like can charge in there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been so interesting, and I'm going to turn it over to you now for anything else you would like to share before we go.
No, just look forward to welcoming as many of the guests who've been listening over to Kenya within as soon as possible. I think we'll find it a magical country to visit with a wonderful variety of wildlife, an amazingly welcoming people, and some stunning landscapes. It's a wonderful destination for to be out on safari in Africa, and I believe still offers the real wild Africa experience that may have been lost in some other areas. I think that the way that we do our safaris as natural habitat, with our small groups and our expert guides, and our real love of the wild and getting people out off the beaten track, is such that it should be an amazing experience for everyone and anyone who comes over, and I look forward to welcoming as many people as we can.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being with you today, and we appreciate all of our audience members who were able to listen in as well. And I think that's all we have now. So with that, we will say good day and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Kwaheri.